Christian Parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. So if you've been around us a while, you know that I wrote the book Courageous, Being Daughters Rooted in Grace, and I dedicated it to our two daughters, Adonaiah and Nevaeh, because I wanted them to know all the things that I have learned about being a woman and the things that we face and our core needs. Jeff and I also launched Courageous Girls, a grassroots movement empowering moms to walk with their daughters at every stage of their growing years. And our online curriculum includes hundreds of free lessons so they can have intentional conversations with the things that girls need to know. And all that to say, we have a heart for daughters, and we're raising up a generation of women who are rooted in grace, who know God's love and have courage to trust Him with their stories.
And as a dad of daughters, I cannot tell you how excited I am to talk with a kindred brother, John Sowers, who took the time to pen words to his girls. Before we let John share, we just want you to understand a bit of his backdrop. John is a published author, speaker, and co-founder of the Mentoring Project, a movement that helped to rewrite the fatherless story of over 25 million youth growing up without a dad through mentoring. And he co-founded that with Donald Miller. John's work and the writings have been featured on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, ESPN, and so on and so forth, so many other places. John also received the President's Champion of Change Award at the White House. Before launching the Mentoring Project, he was the multi-language director for the Billy Graham Association. And before his time at Billy Graham, John directed a homeless shelter where he fed and clothed the homeless, singing and eating with them every night. He's the author of many books, including his most recent release, Say All the Unspoken Things, a book of letters, on February 1st, 2022, HarperCollins. John says his most favorite accomplishment is being a dad to his daughters, Rosie, Dassey. Am I saying that right, John?
Yeah, it's Hadassah, and I call her Das, so it's short for Hadassah.
Okay, Rosie, Das, and Eva?
That's right, for Evangeline. That's
All right. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I love what you guys are doing.
Thank you. It's fun to be with someone who's kindred, and there's so many things in your backdrop that we're going to talk about today. But first, let's just start with your heartfelt letters to your daughters. What motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, it's anybody that has kids, you know how they become so instrumental in just who you are. And as a parent, it just changes everything. I remember when my daughters were born, how my whole life changed for the better. I was terrified and excited and filled with love at the same time. And a few years later, my mom who raised me, I was raised by a single mom, she passed away. And it was, of course, their grandmother. And when she passed, it kind of created this urgency in me. Like, I think death has an urgency to it. It has implications. A lot of us have seen it in the last couple of years. We've been locked in our homes, and we've had to wear masks and take vaccines and hear terrible news stories. And a lot of us have experienced it personally. And so kind of with the backdrop of my mom passing away, their grandmother, and then living kind of in this moment of mortality, it kind of created a new urgency in me of how do I speak to them? What do I say to them? You know, if I had, say, 40 letters to write before I passed away, what would I say? And what would any of us say to our daughters? And so, that book, Say All the Unspoken Things, was born out of that idea of what are the things in my heart that my kids need to hear, and what are the things that all of us need to hear.
So in the book of letters, the way that they were organized, and your daughters are how old again?
Yeah, so Rosie and Doss are the twins. They're almost 11, and then Evangeline is almost 6. So
Hmm.
we've got a handful there.
Yeah, I love that this has taken place here when they were at the ages that they are, because they're going to read these and understand them more fully as they grow in age. And I know that's your hope, I'm sure. How did you organize these letters? I mean, to when you're thinking about what do they need to hear from me as their dad, and what do I want them to hear? Talk a little bit about the subjects and if you organized them in a certain way, or just the sort of the themes there, John.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it was actually really difficult to say, okay, if I have approximately 40 letters, what do I want to say? What do they need? What do they need to build their lives on? And part of this idea was, God created you. He loves you. He's with you. You always have a place with him. And then the next kind of section talks about how to be in the world, like what kind of person to be. And then it asks the question, who am I becoming? And it talks about transformation, like with God's help, transformation just with how we are and the decisions we make. And then there's a section on relationships, our spiritual family, our church experience, our romantic relationships, our friendships, how to act in those situations. So the book, I guess, would cover our relationship with God and each other, and then who we're supposed to be in the world and how. And so, that was a big question, though. And there were times when, how do you write about romantic love to 10-year-old girls who don't even really know a thing about that yet?
Right.
So so that was it.
Well, tell us how you did. What did you tell them? What did you tell your 10-year-old daughters about romantic love?
No,
I'm curious.
Yeah. Oh, about romantic love.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with romantic love, it was, I said something. I think I've heard a theologian say one time that the best way we can learn about something sometimes is to learn what it's not. So I wrote a chapter about what it's not, and then I kind of wrote a couple of chapters about what it was. But on the chapter about what it's not is called The Golden Cloud. And it's this idea that romance, that love is this emotion that we must follow at all costs. So we fall in and out of it like a pit, and we're almost like this, we're passive victims to it. Like love is floating around like this golden cloud above us. And when it lands on us, we have no choice but to fall in, and now we're in love. But the flip side is also true. And this, again, is something what it's not. When the golden cloud leaves and those emotions cool, to be faithful to the golden cloud and to our own feelings, we must leave. And I'm sorry, I'm not in love anymore with you. I need to leave now. I don't have these feelings anymore for you. And I think it was Lewis who said that love, when it becomes a god, becomes a demon, and demons never keep their promises. This idea that God is love, but love is not God, and will never be God. And so sometimes we almost make a God out of this romantic feeling, and we pursue that almost like a love song, And so that was part of love is not this. It's not this fleeting emotion to pursue, even though it's emotional for sure, and it's terrifying in ways. But and then this is what it is. And I talked about the pursuit. I talk about how the character of a man, the way he pursues you, will say a lot about his character. I talked about what a union is and what it means to be, one flesh, and some of those ideas, and about marriage. And so it was a hard few chapters to write. Those were probably the hardest ones to write. So I probably need to open the book again to make sure
hold you accountable, huh?
Yeah, John,
yes.
knowing that your girls are, almost 11 and 6, the twins almost 11 and the 6, obviously you're wanting them to, they're going to hopefully engage with this and with you through this over time. Talk a little
Yes.
bit about that heartbeat behind like what you wanted them to experience when they first heard about it. And we want to hear about, how did they first hear that you had written a book of letters for them? And then talk about your desire for them, how you desired for it to impact them.
Yes. I think by and large, I wanted them to hear just, I love you, from their dad over and over, loud and clear, as, right now. And I hope my life also, expresses that, that same message, not just this book. And so, that was my great hope. And it was a very strong desire, which was turned into a book. But then there's these other ideas in there, about things like romantic love, or how to be in the world, or how to work toward goals. And some of those apply now. And some of those I do hope they can look back on and remember, or learn. It can hopefully speak to them in years to come. So, yeah, on Christmas, the book came a little bit early, and I didn't know it was going to come in time. My original vision was to not tell my girls, to surprise them with the book, to walk into Barnes & Noble, pull it off the shelf, and say, here it is, and kind of have them be excited in Barnes & Noble, have this moment. But it came early, and so I decided to wrap up these advanced copies and put them under the tree. So it was the last present we opened on Christmas, and they had all their, new soccer ball and new, Lego, or all the different things. And they didn't even look at their toys. They were so excited about the book that the two older ones just read it late into the night. They didn't even pick up any of their Christmas gifts. They were so excited. So we had the moment here at the cabin, and they were so happy. It was so neat to see, little tears here and there, to see the affection like having an effect on them as they read it, and they heard, and they kind of came to grips with my dad wrote me this. This is for me. Like each chapter begins with "Dear Rosie" or "Dear Doss" or whatever, and it's very personal to them. So that was something that I wanted them to experience right away, and they did, and they do.
And they do, and they will keep going there. I just think of all, just how everybody who's listening has longed for that, to hear those kinds of words from their dad, and the gift that you gave them. And as parents pick this book up, because we're not going to be handing it to our children, at 10, the goal is that a mom and a dad will read this. What do you hope they do with this message, outside of just your daughters? What a gift for them.
Yes. That's so good. One of the unexpected audiences I've seen is daughters everywhere. Like a friend of mine was on a Canadian Olympic team, and she shared the book to her social media. One of her friends, this friend of hers, father died when she was young, so she never heard words like this from her dad. So it just became, even though I wrote it to my daughters, it just quickly jumped into that girl's existence and in her heart, and she connected with it in a very emotional, powerful way. And so that was really cool. And I literally, I thought it could do that, but I wrote it in a very personal way to my kids. And so one of the things I hope happens is that daughters everywhere, that maybe some of it, and I don't want to be too pretentious and say, but I know God can work with anything. And so maybe God would work with this book in a way to speak grace and life and healing, and that some of these unspoken things to my daughters might actually land on another daughter that I'll never meet. And I think that's been the biggest blessing to get some of those feedbacks.
I guarantee that it'll continue to speak to those who didn't have a dad, or a dad who didn't know how to say those things. And I hear from your messaging about the book that you really want your daughters to hear their Father in Heaven's heart for them to talk a little bit about where all these messages, all these words that you wanted to offer your daughters, where did that come from in your own story? Because I do think in walking with so many parents, so often we don't even know what we want to say to our kids. We know it's in us, but connecting the dots. How did you narrow it down, and what was the pieces in your story? Who spoke these to you? How did you learn these things in your own journey?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm been real blessed to have a family of letter writers. I was raised by two women, a grandmother and a mom. And my mom worked three jobs, and my grandmother showed up every day. And she wrote me letters, my grandmother. And when I moved to college, she wrote me a letter once a week. And it was always a long letter. And it would talk about how she was thinking about me, praying for me. And about 20 years ago, when I did her funeral, I stood up on stage with a huge stack over a foot tall of letters from her. And she found ways to speak into my life and to speak life and to believe in me and to be proud of me and to pray for me. And so I grew up with that kind of affirmation, and it completely changed my life. And so that's part of the impetus, I think, of writing. And then just as a father, when I lost my own mom about 3 years ago, the thing was there was pain and there was grief. But the thing that was kind of surprising about it was not the grief, because everyone knows that's a sad moment, right? But what it was really was an absence that really shocked me. There was such an absence there of like, wow, there's no more conversations. There's no more laughter. There's no more, hey, I need some advice, Mom, or what do you think about this or that? There's just nothing. There's just silence. And I really experienced a void there. And so I said, what do I want to put into my daughter's life, to where, what do I need to say to where if they look for me years and years from now, even if we're separated by decades, if they want an answer from their dad, who's maybe not even here anymore, what would I want to say to them? And so I do hope this book speaks to their 10-year-old self and maybe their elderly self, even if dad's not around anymore.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that's going to happen. It's you made me smile, and as soon as you talked about your grandmother writing you letters, I had a similar experience with my grandpa and grandma. They're both in heaven now, but same type of deal. I have a stack of letters that I've kept when I was in college. They started when I was in high school, and it's profound, that the impact of those words of affirmation and of hopes and of prayers and of the questions that they would ask. And, you wrote letters back to answer them. Right. And
Yes.
the relationship of that is something special about that. I love that you took that, and that's what you're giving to your girls.
And just to speak to our audience a little bit, John, like, let's think practically. There's several things that I think parents are doing just to bring hope to them. One thing Jeff and I started was a journal to our daughters when they were babies, and we just had the wisdom. So maybe once a year, we spend time writing and trying to remind them. And our goal is to give that to them when they leave. And then we have these little prayer journals, mom-daughter journals, where we write back and forth, and I leave them under their pillow, and small things, sticky notes. There's lots of little ways to tell our kids what we want them to know. Do you have any other thoughts and practical ways besides, these letters is definitely what your book is inspiring us to. Do you have any other ideas?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love that you guys are doing, these prayers and journals, and you're solidly in this space, and you've been doing it longer than me. I think, for families, I think traditions are really fun, because then you have that memory, whether that's a holiday tradition or like a dinner tradition, or you pray around the table, even something very simple. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Sunday morning traditions, church. I think some of those things. I read a chapter about memory and about how we're all memory carriers. And it's real interesting how these memories kind of come for us. I remember at the end of my grandmother's life, all the memories kind of came at me. And I was trying to reconcile why do we get these memories, like in these nostalgic kind of powerful emotional ways. And I felt like in that instance anyway, it was like God maybe was bringing them back for appreciation, for love, and also as a heart's way to say goodbye and to be just so thankful for that person's life. And so I think it's creating these memories and embedding these of love and appreciation and gratitude, like you guys are doing, which is so powerful with our children, that as they grow, and like my grandmother, who's been gone for 2 years, I still have these very powerful emotional memories of the way she would be proud of me, or she would pick me up first in line from school and give me a hug and tell me she loved me. And, I could still feel that. I could still feel those moments. And those are like 30-year-old moments plus, and so I could still feel these things. And so I think creating these experiences are like these memory deposits, like these deep heart, soul deposits. There's a mystic who, I believe these words totally. He said, we find love we find strength when we're deeply loved. So when we're deeply loved by like our parents and things, we find strength in that. And we find courage when we deeply love another. So we have courage for our kids. Mm-hmm. We might stand in front of things that we would never otherwise stand in front of to protect our children. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of what we're doing is we are pouring into them this strength of love as we love them deeply. And we draw from that. I still draw from the memories of my mom and my grandmother, even though they're gone, and it changes. It is transforming me, not just the eternal natures of their prayer for me that I believe God still hears. I think prayers kind of maybe have an eternal nature to them, not maybe in the moment, but I think if God hears them, some of the prayers that my grandmother made for me decades ago are still coming true. But I also believe that these memories and these strength deposit they put in us are things we can draw from in the rest of our lives, whether our parents are there or not.
Beautiful.
This just occurs to me here. It maybe you said it in your letters, but if your grandmother could speak or write a letter to your daughters, what would she say? Would it be similar to the things that you've tried to share through what you received as a deposit from her?
Yeah, I think she was so amazing because just the way she was, because there are words which are very important, and then there are lives too. And so her words were good. I think I'm a better writer than her. I hope she doesn't get mad at me one day. I think I'm a better writer than her.
It's good you can own that.
I think so. Maybe not. But she was a very good writer, very confident, had very pretty cursive. Now her cursive is a lot nicer than mine. But who she was in the world was so profound. She was so tender. She never raised her voice. She never spoke ill of people. She was this kind of embodied this tenderness and this love and this warmth. She radiated it. And so I think that's what I would want them to get. And honestly, like some of these chapter titles, like kindness, come from her impact on me. So these chapters are not just like, here's a good topic, what am I going to write about this? And here's a story and here's 3 points. It was really more of like, these are these things that were deeply embedded in my soul as deposits of love from my mom and my grandmother. And so like the kindness chapter, the love chapter, and some of these things, I talk about how beauty is humming softly in every act of kindness in the book, and how it just radiates from them. And I talk about beauty, like what is beauty, and how do you talk about beautiful in this culture? And I talk about that in a whole chapter. So I think I would hope that my grandmother, what she would say to them would be more caught than taught, kind of how we get things. If you heard me sniffle there, I'm sorry. I'm not emotional right now at all. You can tell it's just allergies. I have no emotions talking about any of these. But I'm totally emotional right now. Like when you ask me, man, if you ask me what your grandma, I was like, oh, I'm going to cry. Like if you're
going to cry. Oh, grandma.
I know, you're going to make me cry. You have to make me cry. But
her lie.
Like her life.
Yeah, her life was just, it really got you. It was everything.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And it transformed me. And I would hope they can experience that. Like they can experience that warmness, that kindness. She had this very gentle way about her that, when I would mess up, she would just be like, oh, don't do that, but in a very tenderly grandmother way. And she didn't have to crack the whip. And partly because of the way she loved me, I didn't ever have to get hardly disciplined. She could just kind of express this gentle rebuke, and I would just
just nod and obey, because she was just so, the way she was, like she was so powerful.
Yeah, the
relationship
relationship was so strong. It was there was so much attachment and connection, healthy from what you're describing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all it takes in those moments. And that sounds, I was curious about that. And I figured that it was, again, a huge source, of course, of the kind of messaging that you would be wanting to embody, not just speak, but to embody and impart. And, yeah, so let's, question now about just the reality of the challenges. I mean, even just in the difference in generation between yourself and your daughters, and how even grandma might, have embodied it. She probably would have still done the same things today with your girls if she were here, as she had done with you. So nothing's changed in terms of her approach, probably, but it is harder. And there is more pressures in raising daughters today, and we're not trying to exclude sons here. We have daughters as well. Sure. And the challenges in which they're facing have all exponentially increased, pressures and comparison and so on and so forth. I mean, speak for a second here, John, about what you're seeing as some of the greater challenges in raising and leading daughters in today's world.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Some of the challenges, I think the beauty chapter was probably one of the hardest to write. That was a hard one. What is beauty, and what they're being told what beauty is. Sorry, I'm sniffling still here from your question. And then a chapter
you're all right, man.
Got me all sniffly. A chapter on one called Wonder, and I kind of contrast wonder with distraction. And I talk about how distraction kind of pulls us away from the moment, and we're distracted. We're addicted to distraction, right? I mean, we wake up and we scroll, and we're transfixed to these little LED screens. And so, so I talk about that. I think that's big. I think the timeless message of staying connected with God. I just got off a podcast with Jesus Calling, and one of the things, I haven't even read every page of that book. I know it's impacted a lot of people, but one of the things I appreciate about that book is that it calls us to connect with God daily. And I think there's a rhythm that we find that's so valuable in our distracted world. Instead of waking up, scrolling, listening to the outrage about who did what, why I should be upset about that, or checking about who liked my picture, and all that stuff can be quite a distraction from like the one thing that's necessary, that Jesus talks about. When Martha was worried and upset over many things, she was distracted, and Jesus kind of said, there's only one thing. You don't need to be distracted. You don't need to be worried and upset. And I think we live in that place of this addiction to distraction and kind of lost focus. But yeah, I think my grandmother would be the same person, and those values of kindness and gratitude and humility. I tell a story in the book and bravery. I tell a story in the book about my mom being a 15-year-old high school senior at Little Rock Central in 1957, when the Little Rock Nine came. These were the first Black students to integrate in the state of Arkansas. And my mom was a 15-year-old senior, so she had skipped about 2 grades, and she was the editor of the yearbook. Well, part of that situation got so out of hand because the governor at the time of Arkansas was supposed to contain the riots and all the problems, but he kind of stood down. So then Eisenhower sent in, I think it was 2,000 troops of National Guard for the whole year to protect these students from these angry and racist mobs. And so here's my mom as a 15-year-old senior in 1957 in a racist environment, not fully racist, but there were racists around her. And most of them, she said, were outside of the school. It wasn't the students. It was outside of the school. But she said in an article that we will be ashamed one day. We'll look back on this moment that we could not, and be ashamed that we could not integrate peacefully and without all these protests. And so she was speaking boldly and bravely into a racist moment as a 15-year-old high school senior female, and saying, this is not how it should be. even standing against the Arkansas governor in a way.
Yeah,
And
go
it's
girl.
like, wow, that takes a lot.
That's
of
a courageous girl
Yeah,
there.
it takes a lot of backbone. Yeah, absolutely. And so to point at that story and say, this is your lineage. This is where you come from. Wow.
Yeah, it's getting you, man. It's so beautiful.
It's an incredible lineage. Yeah.
And your daughters knowing that and seeing that and even getting maybe a chance to read some of those letters that grandma or mom, what they're a part of, that's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah, so amazing. So amazing. So I hope they get that. I hope they get the bravery and the kindness and the humility. And, with me, they don't get in trouble a whole lot. I'm mostly the fun dad. You got to respect me and you got to say thank you and you got to be kind to each other. When the sisters fight, they get in trouble for that real quick. Like we will be kind. And I think these are the values that were just transferred to me and I get to pass down now.
Thank you. Well, there's so many more places we could go, John. We wanted to ask you a little bit about, your time with the mentoring project and working with homeless. But because of our time being so short, we just trust that this is what people needed to hear today. And we're thankful for all you've been giving through your years, especially this last book. Will you leave our listeners with one last word of encouragement that just feels like it's on your heart and you want them to hear today?
Yeah, I thank you so much. I'm really impressed with you guys. Not flattery. Like you guys are in this space. You guys are very authentic and sincere, and it's been a real pleasure. I don't get emotional like this, and I think it was your vulnerability and your kindness, which is why I'm sniffling right now. Thanks, and I've had a lot of podcasts, and I don't do it. I kind of keep my game face on a lot better. And so I don't have my game face on anymore. It's gone. But
we appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a quote in the book that says, we don't always get to say goodbye. We don't always know when will be our last hug or high five, laugh, or I love you. Sometimes we never get the chance to say goodbye. And then I think the quote says, all we have is today, now, and what we do in this one shining moment. And so it's this idea that this moment is the time to unlock our hearts and to wherever we've been, if we've been in a bad place, if we've been kind of a prodigal, or if we've carried bitterness, or if we've not lived close to our heart, or if we're living distracted right now, which I'm sure a lot of us are. I've done that for long seasons. Live disconnected from God because I'm distracted by a little 2-inch screen. Today and now is the time. It's the time to move and to do something, to write that letter to the dad that we can't forgive for something, or to reach out to our children, or to begin writing what you guys are doing with your children. And so I think today is a great day to start. This is our one shining moment.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Thank you, John, for all that you are. And thank you for your vulnerability and for dropping your game face and just being you today with us. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah. Well, if you are raising daughters, or maybe you're a woman and just need to get in touch with this book, you want to get it. It's All the Unspoken Things, a book of letters. And I'm going to push a little bit to tag on with Courageous, Being Daughters Rooted in Grace. I think these books would be a beautiful pair for you if you're raising daughters, both for a father and a mother's heart. You can also check out our free online curriculum at mycourageousgirls.com if you're wanting to walk with your daughter every step of her growing years. And you can even do that in groups with moms and daughters. We're trying to build that community and help dads to even walk with them in all the different phases of their journey. If you want to learn more, go to mycourageousgirls.com.
And John, for our listeners, if they want to find you in other spaces, what's the best place for them to find you at?
It's probably Instagram, just at johnsowers.com, John. It's like Sowers, Sowers. And I'm on there frequently. And I try to respond to DMs and that kind of thing. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And thanks for just who you guys are in the world and what you're about.
You too, John.
Yeah,
thank you. What a gift today.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.